Good morning, everyone. Welcome to my driveway. It's so exciting. About as quiet out here in the old New York woods. Well, I'm back to read a little bit more. I don't have a lot of extra thoughts, I don't think, to share today, but I'll read more of Where Time's Eye Shines Bright. We just left Sandy Joe on the curb out in front of the apartment building. After pedaling down 6th Street, past the house Ann, my ex-partner, and I lived in, onto the southern outskirts of Ludington, the Pierre Marquette Highway was waiting. I rolled to a stop in the middle of the street, considered what we were about to do. I looked back at the pups, the time machine, and with a sublime smile, we rolled into a gentle southern breeze. The journey had begun, and before long, I was battling a couple long, steep hills, which would let me know I would have to get off and push, because the time machine was pretty freaking heavy. Slap! My first wake-up call came swift as if across my bare ass. The vision of this day had jumped off the paper and landed on the pavement with a heavy thud. This was when the rubber of my reality and the highway of hope met for the first time. Nonetheless, I was grateful for another peek behind the curtain of my childhood curiosity, because sometimes I just couldn't get enough. Within this darkness, the path was well lit. The light of truth always comes, because there is no place to hide in this old world. Wherever we go, there we will be. With each pump of the pedal, my eyes focused on the foreverness and the sublimeness of the timeless. Later on in sweet dreams, it was time to fly. This pure unpredictability would hopefully unleash the flavor and spice to a life worth living, even one that meant riding the edge of a knife, not one of fear. The intoxicating call of the unknown had crept into my bones. I had found my life so predictable that I could no longer stomach the grinding wheels of the machine. Finally, the world revealed itself in a way I could hear, and I was willing to listen. As we descended the next hill, a shady roadside park appeared on the left. Sweet mercy! We desperately needed a break already. Haas and Queen's questioning eyes begged to get off. "What the hell are we doing out here, Dad?" I grinned and said, "Exactly. I was hoping one of you knew." There were blank stares all around. As we descended the next hill, Oh, I hadn't been down this old highway for many moons and had forgotten how hilly it was. I was certain this place was at least the halfway point between Ludington and Hart, Michigan, if you remember. I had decided to bite off a 21-mile day on this first of many more after silently declaring, "I have to open up the throttle and see what I can take. I'd rather know sooner than later, for heaven's sake." As we came to a stop, I could hardly recall this place from years of cruising up and down this highway in another lifetime ago. Now, reflecting on that life, it seemed like a distant dream. Ann and I had lived and loved here before our move to Kentucky and the great demise. Now that we were here, I was grateful nonetheless. I felt like a stranger in a strange land. I wondered how long I had been sleepwalking. Where am I? Who am I? Where have I been? Perhaps I had been living in the dreams of other souls once again. We found our way up the lush green, gently sloping hill. Waiting above us was the precious shade of a stand of freshly budding white oak trees. The ground was littered with the broken remnants of last year's acorns. An old unpainted weather picnic table sat waiting, and the gift in an artesian spring waited below us. It flowed fast with a concentrated effort from an old metal pipe sticking out of a rock wall. The water had a slight hint of sulfur, but it was cold, and it cut the dust like no other. After drinking a bellyful of the sweet elixir, I ceremoniously knelt, closed my eyes, and offered my head to the steady flow. The shock of the cold was a relief from the morning heat, as the melodic sound of the water splashing on the flat stones beneath my feet gently rang in my ears. It felt like time had stood still. When I couldn't take the icy cold anymore, I stood up, took the deepest of belly breaths and could feel that this journey had just been blessed. I could relax now that my heart wasn't pounding like a big bass drum. After the salty river of sweat pouring out of my body had run dry, I was reluctant to get back on the road. Queen and Haas were stretched out underneath the picnic table with relief in their eyes, soaking in the coolness of the ground and shade. Looking at it from the top of the hill, the time machine looked like nothing but work, with a hint of hope and foreseeable freedom. With nothing but pure will and absolute frustration with my place in the world, the wheels had been set in motion. Well, the creation below was what I got for letting the wheels in my head roll off the tracks with my life in tow. Now it had all become quite real. While sitting on the back, Haas was tethered from both sides to his newly acquired harness. Queen was perched right in front of him with the serenity of a saint. I didn't need to tell her that the ride of a lifetime was coming. She already knew. But Haas, not so much. Haas and Queen were as different as night and day, but equally important in their special way. Haas's balls still swung, which gave him the fire I admired. Like a German shepherd, he was a guard dog. Like a beagle, he didn't listen worth a crap and only came back when he was good and ready. Yeah, he sure did. This was when I didn't admire him so much. Damn you, Haas. That's why he was usually attached to a leash, because I was overly concerned about him getting run over most of the time. The everlasting memory of my 8-year-old self was one of the longest days of my life, and it was not to be relived. My dog, Butch, was run over right in front of me while I was standing near the road calling him to come back home. I spent the rest of the day sitting beside the road until nightfall with the biggest rock my little hand could hold to throw at the windshield of the dark gray pickup truck that gunned its engine and intentionally ended Butch's life without blinking an eye. Anyway, the rock never found a home except in my memory as a reminder of the weight of my regret for calling him in the first place, because he was perfectly fine where he was, but the truck was long gone and I inherited that dreadful feeling ever since, helplessness. That's why I kept constant vigilance over Haas to keep him safe and sound. And maybe in part because I felt guilty for Butch's death. If you see me looking around, I live in black bear country, so got to look at every noise. They both sat on an old flower print cushion from a long forgotten outdoor lawn chair, and I had Queen tethered to her collar. She didn't need a harness because she was too old, fat, and wise to do anything but sit there and enjoy the ride. I secured a red duffel bag with a bungee cord to the right rear. Finally, on my back was fully loaded red and black backpack weighing about 30 pounds. It still looked brand new. Sandy Jo gave it to me. Said she bought it for herself when she moved to Alaska in 1994, the year I wandered from home once again as a bright-eyed 19-year-old back to Tennessee. We were living in Baraboo, Wisconsin at the time. I didn't strap it down because I was worried the weight was already too much. After all, this was all a guessing game. For the first time, I felt free to offer myself up to the wind and trust we would be fine. I had no idea, but I knew I didn't feel afraid, which was a damn good feeling. Besides, the backpack's weight hadn't started to rear its ugly head until the day's ride was nearing the end. Speaking of, we had made our way back to the time machine. Getting the pups on and off was tricky, especially when Haas jumped on and it wanted to lurch forward from the weight of his enthusiasm. My fear was the cracking noise of overstressed wood, which thankfully never came. Since much of the weight was concentrated at the neck, gravity pulled the two-wheeled pony downward and to the left. Mind you, this was the time machine's first real run. I had only finished it 2 days before we left. The only trial run was a 7-mile round trip ride to my job at the golf course at Lincoln Hills. I rolled there empty to show the crew what we were about to do. They had heard, but now had witnessed the word come to life. Wide eyes stared, heads shook all around. The true test was the first day, because I wasn't worried about whether the weight would be too much or not. I had left Ludington with no possibility, in my mind, of turning around. The thought burned hot. What was I going to turn around to anyway? The declaration had been made. anywhere but here. The time machine had to stay together until we landed at my friend's house in Hart. I hoped we would be far away from Ludington if there were any issues. There was no room on the time machine for the weight of doubt or fear. I desperately wanted out of the mental shackles that I had found myself in, or more likely, I put myself into. This was when I needed to know, have I been a character in someone else's story? Do I even have a story? All I knew was that I would find out, one way or another, and stop asking the questions. The rest of the day brought on more hills and more pushing. I began to realize I had too much weight and knew something had to go. I wasn't too worried about it, though, because I had a more pressing, unforeseen concern. Yeah. The near constant stream of traffic had grabbed my attention, and how carelessly close some of the metal beasts had gotten. The automobiles. The metal beast. The shoulder of the road was no wider than the time machine, and the white line separating us from them wasn't much comfort. Little did I know how much more butt-clenching the journey would become when the shoulders of the highways would be next to non-existent, and that's when the real party started. The breeze from this morning had turned into a howling headwind. I guessed we were still 5 forever miles from Hart. In the meantime, as I was physically going down in flames, I heard a car horn from behind. I whipped my head around to see a familiar dark green sedan power sliding to a stop on the loose gravel shoulder behind us. It was none other than my buddy Romeo, my friend in Hart. He lived for coming in hot and heavy. He was blazing home after visiting the local head medicine man up north. He couldn't have come at a better time because I was worn down by the wind. The highway had seen better days. Because it resembled a washboard. By God, it felt like riding on one. Long, wide, erratic half-inch cracks spider-webbed out in every direction. These Michigan winters could beat up a road with the snow plows and salt. He jumped out of the car and hollered, "How's it going so far, Dr. Dan?" His nickname for me after I started wearing reading glasses last year. I offered a short breath reply. "Not bad, brother. This time machine's pretty freaking heavy." He offered to take something off, but I wouldn't hear of it. If this was the weight, there was no point in lightening it up now. I decided to hand over the backpack, though. I was near exhaustion and was glad to see him tuck it away in the trunk of his car. As Romeo closed the trunk, he spun around with his classic monkey face grin. "You only have a couple more miles, Dr. Dan." He laughed, jumped behind the steering wheel, and sped away while honking the horn. My shoulders and neck were most grateful because up until then they had been cramping and begging for mercy. Start time 13 minutes, all right. After rolling out again, we found a newly paved road, so the rest of the ride into Hart was silky smooth. The wind calmed down after Romeo came and went. I did have the thought that kept poking at my brain. What the hell have I gotten us into? This wasn't the first time I'd asked myself the question in my previous wanderings. I had long ago accepted these forever stretches of being in life. Leaving one existence for another could be a turbulent transition, almost like dying and being reborn to a new possibility. It could be brutal when I allowed myself too much comfort, and when the strange, new world I had stepped off into had immediate demands, and that I may or may not be able to satisfy. Yet the impact was usually short-lived after the reality of it all sank in and took hold. As we rolled into Romeo's front yard, I was relieved to have finally escaped the sun and the wind of the first day's ride. My head was spinning. It was an overcast day, but not enough to keep the sun from doing a nasty number on my arms and neck, which were toast. That would be the only day I would be without sunblock, which I rarely ever wore at the golf course. The devil's breath is in the details. The pups did all right, considered it was their first day. Haas was just such a fireball of energy as he constantly shifted around. He's going to need a while to figure this one out. Not Queen, though. She was a pillar of patience. I swear I've seen her roll her eyes at me more than once over similar decisions, only to let it go for the sake of what was so. Blow, wind, blow. I tied Haas to the trunk of a small maple tree for shade, and Queen crawled underneath the time machine. I lay on my back on the grass for what seemed like forever, soaking up the coolness of the ground, lying there with my eyes closed. I was overcome with relief and pride. I didn't know what to expect on our first day, but getting there seemingly wasn't impossible. I was so proud of the pups hanging in there because we were all in this together as a little family, and that's all that mattered to me. I drifted away like a newborn in the arms of its mother, but not before Romeo walked over and nudged me with his foot. "Are you going to make it?" he asked as he stood over me smiling. I stretched out my arms and legs and made the motion of making a snow angel. "Hell's bells, I hope so. We made it this far." "Well, take it easy. I'm going inside to watch some baseball." I waved my arm in the air and closed my eyes. The cool, solid ground felt like heaven on earth. A while later, the rumble of distant thunder woke me. The temperature had dropped and the wind picked up, which announced the oncoming rain. The raindrops began to fall, and I would answer the call for a smoke of sweet green. Afterwards, my mind became quiet. While sitting near the living room window, I watched the rain come down hard, which explained the steady wind blowing out of the south all day. It was on its way, and I was grateful we had missed getting caught in it. Me and the pups wandered in the basement, where we would sleep tonight, and finished our nap. When we finally stirred again, the day was getting on, and the sun had given up to a low, fast-moving slate-gray clouds, and in the air lingered the aroma of earthly freshness. I hadn't thought much about the rain. It was simple. When it rained, we were going to get wet. I had reasoned that it was warm enough without too much hassle, or so I thought. The weather around the Great Lakes was predictably unpredictable. We would find out in a few days that this wouldn't be quite the truth. Honestly, I was craving the elements, purposefully exposed us to them by holding my feet to the fire, because my vision was to shed my old skin and begin again. I wanted every morsel of madness to be had. This is part of my drop-in narration in the here and now. As I sit here now revising the story, I'm shaking my head at myself for not even bringing a rain suit, but I was hell-bent on a bare-bones ride. There's nothing like some self-induced suffering to spice up the party. Ain't that the truth? 17 minutes. Well, what do I have here? Time to read these? After a heavenly meatloaf and mashed potato meal with Romeo and his wife, Becky, we went to the back deck to lounge and watch the day slip into the night. Sitting there burning down a doobie, Romeo broke the silence. "Are you ready for it, Dr. Dan?" Before I could answer, I spotted the familiar flickering glow of the night's first firefly out of the corner of my eye. "Look," I said while pointing into the dark as the sparkle rose. Sparkle, I had to look that up. Sparkle is a group of, like a herd of fireflies. It's a sparkle, kind of cool. As the sparkle rose and lit up the night air with their songs of silence. The image never grew old. A long time forgotten dream of the breezeless, muggy summer nights back in Tennessee as a young boy. A clear glass jar that once held pickles with a metal lid with holes poked in it with a nail and hammer, and the wondering heart of a young boy looking for an adventure in the wildness of the backyard. There was the prize of bragging rights for whoever caught the most. Usually we couldn't count them because they wouldn't stay still long enough. Of course, the grand finale was releasing them from the jar to fly away and carry on with their lives as the messengers of the night. After considering his question, I leaned back in the creaky old rocking chair, beaten up by the sun and rain, and looked at Romeo for a few breaths. With my softened eyes and a monkey grin, I said, "Does it matter, brother? I've got nothing to lose. Everything precious to me is right here and now," I said as I pointed at Hoss and Queen fast asleep at my feet. He could see in my eyes as they gleamed with the glimmer of the unknown. I couldn't have cared any less. I had thrown my soul to the mercy of the four winds and was willing to ride, no matter how long or high. He returned my grin and said, "I guess not. You made it this far, you crazy bastard." "Exactly, brother. We've picked up the scent of a long time forgotten dream, and we're going to run it down once and for all." After a few rounds of tall tales, wishful thinking, and the sweet aroma of flowering apple trees from the surrounding orchards filled the night air, we offered our good nights and headed for bed. The basement bedroom was cool and dark. The roaring silence. I've got a car here running. The roaring silence stood over as we surrendered. It's my neighbor. Surrendered to the day and were fast asleep. I figured this bed would be our last for quite a while. Before falling into sweet by and by, I knew the morning sun would come soon enough. So would the second day of this journey. My sleep was restless as I tossed and turned. I wasn't sure if the demands of the day were still working on me. Maybe the iron grip. A chipmunk just ran right up to my feet. Are you serious? I love it. I love nature. My sleep was restless. As I tossed and turned, I wasn't sure if the demands of the day were still working on me. Maybe the iron grip of my past in Ludington escaped from its chain and now was loose and running wild. This night would bring the first of many long time forgotten dreams that have led me to this day. Should be that day. The dream seemed like it had happened yesterday, but it was 21 years ago. I felt like I was watching someone else's past in the present, yet I was witnessing my own. So this is my dream. It's actually a memory, but it's a dream memory. It's when it all started. Well, not when it all started, but a big turning point. The blue sedan came to a jarring stop, but not without the predictable unnerving rattle of its loose muffler. The air conditioner was blowing at full blast, and the cassette player was blaring out the angst of AC/DC's Live Wire. The parking lot of the bus station was deserted. The weary-eyed middle-aged mother and her wild-eyed teenage son sat in silence, eyes forward, sitting motionless in the muggy Tennessee June summer night air, just a stone's throw from the banks of the Cumberland River, winding through the heart of Clarksville, Tennessee. Light rain fell on the windshield. The yellow glare from the overhead fluorescent streetlight began to distort the boy's vision of his future, which was sitting motionless in front of him, through the raindrops resting on the glass. The fear of the unknown was creeping in. The ghostly words felt like a hammer had finally struck the hot iron. Get out of the car and be done with it. He drew in a deep belly breath. The smoke from the menthol cigarette she had on the drive there had seeped into his clothes and weighed heavily on his heart. The smell was one he most associated with his mother. While slightly slumping in the passenger seat, he turned his head slowly enough to meet her eyes, as if they sensed it was time. Excuse me. You know, Mom, I'm sorry about how this turned out. The tears welled up in his eyes. I know, son, me too. But you have become too wild, and if you want this, you can have it. Her eyes were also filled with tears of love and disappointment for him and herself. She fumbled around in her purse for what he had demanded from her, found it, and then reluctantly handed over his paper ticket out of there and away from her chaos. They both stepped out of the car as if in slow motion. The air was heavy and eerily quiet. They found each other in front of the car for a last hug, solidifying the split. Do you want me to wait until it leaves? She says. No, that's okay. I'll be fine, he says while shaking his head and avoiding looking at her. Her eyes shifted from side to side while staring at the wet pavement under her feet, as if she had finally understood, numbed by it all, defeated. Okay, son, I understand. I know you will be fine. I'm convinced of it now. With slumped shoulders and a heavy heart, Sandy Joe slid behind the steering wheel and drove away into the darkness of her life that she called home. As Danny stood there with his back turned to yesterday. After shaking off the moment, he picked up his army green duffel bag, head held high, walked towards the bus, a small gray concrete building where anywhere but here it was waiting. I'm almost done. Last page, half a page. When I woke up, the room was quieter than quiet and blacker than black. Hoss and Queen snuggled beside me and weren't moving a muscle. As I lay there, I felt grateful to have gotten this far and was at peace about what was unknowingly waiting for me. I felt purged in some small way, but the purging had only begun. Here's my drop-in narration. As I sit here revising today, I remember envisioning a great purging of my monkey mind that day by throwing my physical and mental energies into the fire of human existence to hopefully burn off the impurities of the illusion of the American dream. I hadn't thought about that night since that night. Maybe something was released earlier when I said goodbye to Sandy Joe again. Perhaps the debt of mutual long overdue forgiveness had indeed been paid in full. The tired old ghost that I pedaled, pushed, and sweated my ass off to make distance from did something. It moaned in the here and now because it had no choice but to move on and haunt another soul. I could feel it grudgingly flee from the room. Then I felt in my bones it was gone. The ghost knew there was no more sadness, anger, or fear to feast on here. It had all withered on the vine of time. When the darkness begins to overpower the light, the moment comes when it's time to boogie. I had stepped off into the unknown, and there was no going back. As my brother Robbie was known to say, "Feet don't fail me now, let's boogie on down the road." Amen, brother, I say. Be willing to kick us some dust when one must, when the time comes to shake off the rust, with only yourself to trust. At the end of every chapter, I've written a 6-line, 6-stanza poem. I'm not a trained poet. Typical. I got chickens over here. This is hawk season. The eternal days of the old ways and the hope of the new. One settles like an anchor, the other flew away like it knew. My wish was not to dismiss the path that had led me to this day. I know what was can only be remembered as it fades away. So the wind of change sends its message to the open mind, those willing to seek their truth rather than stay behind. The end of chapter 1. Thank you for sitting through that. It's interesting reading it out loud, reliving it. What a great exercise with an author. Read your work out loud. You'll find out real quick its flow, its tempo, its pace, misuse of verb tenses, and oh gosh, you name it. Yeah, my mother had a prescription pill problem, and as a nurse, she had access. There's more to talk about. I may bust out the second chapter. I feel like maybe leaving it here is not going to be satisfying enough. I won't be able to go past that, though, just because of what I said about the revisions and all of that. But got on that bus in the middle of the night, went to Oscoda, Michigan. Went to Oscoda, Michigan that night. Showed up at 10 o'clock at night. My cousins thought I was coming the next day. I'm like, good God, what do I do? I walked down the highway and walked into a mom and pop motel and wanted a room. God, back in 1980, what was it, 9? 88, 89, I don't remember, 88. It was like $25. And my mother had given me $100 in cash when she put me on the bus. And yeah, that's when it began. And I rode that Greyhound bus over 10 years. The last place I got off the bus was in Denver, Colorado. 10 years later. 10 years later. And in between that time, I've sat and added up the mileages. I won't tell you all the places from here to there. It's over 17,000 miles I rode on that Greyhound bus. That's a story in itself. Back then I wasn't journaling or writing anything, but I have kind of a memory where a lot of things just seem to surface like a movie almost. I'm fortunate in that. Very fortunate. So I wish everyone a great, what is today, Thursday? A great Thursday. Get out and get some sunshine. Be with nature. Turn the machines off if you can. If not now, later. So Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me. This is it, right? It's not about just finding your way. It's about, for me, telling my story and having other people be inspired by it, whether it's their story or not, that no matter what you think, there is more than one way to do something. If you feel like you're trapped in a situation, I felt like I was trapped in Michigan, and the only thing that came up was building that trailer and bicycling out of that town. No hard feelings with anyone or the town. I just kept on seeing the ghost of my ex, Anne, everywhere I went. And I felt embarrassed and just not proud to be in the position that I was in my life. And I took an extreme measure. I took an extreme action. And it was one hell of a ride. So, later, tater tots.